So welcome. We're so glad to have you back today to talk about Chapter 3 of the Thomas and Collier Book Study Number 1, the Blue Book, Educating English Learners for a Transformed World. This is Ivana Manthor Anderson, and I am here with Dr. Anne Marie Gunter, and we are looking forward to hearing from all of you today. We really want to encourage you to be willing to unmute yourself or raise your hand so that we can unmute you, so that we can hear your voice as we go through this broadcast. Some of the questions today will be a little deeper and maybe a little harder for you to type, and so we look forward to hearing your voice. So today's agenda, we are just doing one chapter today, Chapter 3, which is Module 5, How Long to Full Gap Closure. And we know this is a topic that is discussed and agreed upon and disagreed upon all over the country. So we're excited to hear your thoughts as we go through this today. As always, you have your audio controls, your hands, and your question box. If you're having trouble with your audio, one idea is to unplug your headset and plug it back in. Hopefully by now you guys are all very familiar with your control box. And we got a few things that are going to pop up.
Keep in mind, as always, our questions box is there for everyone. We do like for you to respond, especially if you're going to raise your hand and be unmuted, so that we know what exactly you want to talk about and make sure we put you with each question that's correct.
All right, so when you look at our timeline, we have completed our first two sessions, going into our third, and we just want to make sure, remember, you don't need to be here next Tuesday, October 22nd. That is a week off, so you have a little extra time to work on your next chapter. So how long to full gap closure? As Anne-Marie said, please remember you can put your answers in the question box or raise your electronic hand to be unmuted, and we really do encourage you to unmute and share your thoughts with us today. So let's get on into our first poll question. What did you discover as you explored the research and the data related to the EL achievement gap? You can choose all of these that apply. ELs need to make more than 10 months of progress annually. Disaggregating by groups helps identify gaps. There's no research to support 3 years to fluency. Or I'm not sure, but I'm eager to hear the discussion. Let's launch the poll and see what you have to say.
Okay, that's almost everyone getting their vote in. Go ahead and finish up here in about 5 seconds, and then we'll take a look.
So great. We see that about 77% of you agree with the idea that an EL needs to make more than 10 months progress annually in order to close that achievement gap. 58% of you tied on the second and the third about disaggregating by groups helps identify gaps. I think we talked about that a little bit in one of our previous webinars, and we'll talk about that some more today. And also that the research doesn't really support the idea of 3 years to fluency. And a few of you are still in there with that, I'm unsure, but I'm eager to hear the discussion. And then you might even agree with one, but not be sure about the others. So that's another reason for us to have as many voices as possible today, sharing with us your thoughts on these topics. So as we move from the poll question into our first discussion question, go back one. I thought I had put a discussion question for that on there. I know that we'll be touching on some of these, but before we go into the connections, there we go. So English speakers are not just sitting around waiting for English learners to catch up. And the second quote, English learners must make more than 1 year's progress for many years in a row to eventually catch up. So these are kind of following up from the poll question you just had. We want to know, which of these quotes would you use with policymakers, parents, or other stakeholders to describe the needs of ELLs and why?
So once again, you can put that information in the questions box, and what we prefer you do is put a note in the questions box that you would like to be unmuted. That way it's easier for us to see who's ready to speak and give us a response to this question.
It looks like Emily Golightly has her hand up. Emily, you're self-muted.
Hey, can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Looks like Emily's trying to talk. I'm not able to hear her.
Oh no, I'm on my phone this time. Can you hear me?
So Emily, it still looks like you're trying to talk. If anyone else can hear her, but we can't.
We've got to note that she can be heard online. Give us a moment here.
I'm going to try something else. All right, are you able to hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Emily, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are. I'm not sure what's going on with our computers. Please go ahead, and thank you all for your patience.
Well, and I apologize. I'm on the phone today. I'm in between picking up my daughter from practice after school.
Just glad
So
you're
when
with
I
us.
was reading this chapter, I really thought both of those quotes were awesome. I highlighted both of them and put big stars beside them. So to me, I think they both speak volumes about our need and our sense of urgency to really do something more than what a lot of these kids are getting. You know, the 3 years is not enough. The limited support in a lot of cases is not enough, and not giving them the gift of time, we're really doing a disservice to these kiddos. So I think any of those stakeholders could benefit from hearing both of those quotes, and to me they were very impactful.
And any ideas on how to get started with this? Oh, she's muted again. Do you want to read some of the things in the question box?
Yeah. Keep in mind that we're asking which of these quotes you would use upon policymakers, parents, or other stakeholders to describe the needs of others. So we have Elizabeth who said, I'd use the first quote about English speakers not just sitting around waiting for English learners to catch up, because the second one seems discouraging. Both are true, but as a parent or other stakeholders, or especially a student, the second statement would depress me.
Very interesting. We do have several other hands up, so let's see how we can do here. Claire, I see your hand up. Oh, Claire, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I think that, both statements are really strong, but I think it's hard for people to understand that point that while our English language learners are working to learn the information, learn their language, and learn the information that's being taught in school, that the other students, meanwhile, are learning all the information that's being taught that year in school. And if we have any students that are sight students that are, are a little behind because of the education that they had maybe in the previous country, then they have to work even harder to catch up.
Thank you. Carlos. Hey, Carlos. Can you hear me? Carlos Sosa, you're unmuted. You had your hand up. Can you hear me? All right, I'm going to mute Carlos back. And I'll go ahead and mute Claire back as well. See if we have any other hands up. We have a number. Luisa, are you there? You're self-muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So I think I would use the second one. It's more powerful for me because it's not as simple as providing resources or having the right support for learning the language. Learning language is a long process. And if we take into account, for example, students' ages, I have been teaching high school, and I think, a high school student, a teenager, is afraid of experimenting with the language because people can laugh at them, And sometimes teachers might take this silent period, and not only teachers, administrators would take this silent period as students being reluctant to communicate or to learn. We get these kind of reactions, especially from those who have never learned another language.
So very interesting. So being able to educate people who haven't walked in those shoes sounds like an important piece of
Exactly.
that. All right. So understanding that the English learners aren't just waiting is something that many people may not have thought about. Fantastic. Thank you. Anne-Marie has stepped out to get some equipment to try to fix some of our problems. I'm going to unmute a few more people, and thank you to those of you who are typing in the chat box as well. Regina? Hi, can you hear me? Regina, your hand is up. Did you want to speak? I guess not. Rhonda, how about you? Rhonda Wooten, your hand is up. Did you want to speak?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. While I agree with both of the statements, I'm an adult ESL educator, and it has been my experience. We know that whatever the need is, they're not going to get it just from being in a classroom. So there has to be something that the students are doing outside of the classroom. So I assign homework, and I have found that it works. It gives them that extra, whatever it is they need outside of the classroom, whatever we're going over, they have the opportunity to practice it on their own away from the classroom. And I find that that has worked for my adult learners.
Okay, so authentic purposes. That works for all learners. Having that authentic purpose. Sometimes what happens in the classroom may not seem so authentic, but if you learn something in the classroom in a safe environment, then you have the chance to go out and practice it. That's a great way to actually learn that language because you have a legitimate reason to use it. So thank you, Rhonda. Okay, we're going to pause for just a second.
We do still see your notes. The audio is not great. Please give us about 30 seconds to fix that situation. Please give us just a moment. All right, we've tried to fix the audio. Please go ahead and raise your hand if you can hear me broadcasting. All right, thank you so much. And now Ivana's going to do a sound check too.
All right, let's see if you can hear me. I'm getting an echo. You can't hear me. Let me try. I'm going to try again. I could hear you when you were talking, Aunt Marie.
If you can hear Ivana talking, go ahead and raise your hand.
So let's try it again. Okay, I toggled between phone.
All right, thank you. Just a moment. Let's go ahead and continue our conversation.
So if you wanted to put your hand back up to speak.
Actually, why don't we just put her in the chat box while we're waiting to get people back on board? Thank you all for your patience. I was just going to start. Let's see, Allison typed in that she agrees with both, but probably would use the first. You may have read that one. Anne, did you read Anne's already? Anna's? The both quotes are necessary because they are both true. So I think that's very interesting that both being true makes them necessary. And it's because English speakers are not just waiting school as to continue on, and at the same time, English learners need to learn the content plus the new language. So if you remember, and we'll be getting to this in just a moment, one of the things we talk about is that students have double the work, and that's exactly what Anna has just said in her statement. Do you have one you'd like to share, Anne Marie? Actually, let's go ahead and unmute some people. Great. Serilda, I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead and share, please.
I just was agreeing with a lot of what I've heard. I thought we could only choose one, so I would choose. Can you guys hear me? Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
I was gonna choose the second one because there are so many people who, when they hear a student speak English, they feel like because they're speaking English that they have accomplished everything in the acquisition of English, but that's not always the case. They know how to speak in an area that they're familiar with. If you introduce something else, they might not have enough language. So we have to take into consideration you learn different language for different things that you're involved in. So they might have the language of math, but not the language that they need on the basketball court. So you pick up things as you're doing them. So people have to understand that you learn in sections and in incrementally. So just because they hear someone speaking a language doesn't mean they have particularly mastered the whole language.
Great point. Thank you. I see that Peggy has her hand up. Peggy, did you want to say something?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The English learner, both quotes are accurate. I agree. Sometimes I worry about whether I sound a little too sassy or not. I don't think I was sitting around saying, well, we're not just sitting around. However, what I have found, most of my ELs come in to me as kindergartners. And it really amazes me the amount of vocabulary or the broad range of vocabulary that our children as native English speakers have when they're so young. When I first started, I was blown away the fact that my ELs just knew bug. They didn't know ladybug, cricket, grasshopper. So their vocabulary is so small compared to a native learner. It does take forever for them to catch up. They've got to learn so much more and just pile everything on top, not just vocabulary, but sentence structure, subject verb agreement, and they don't hear that at home. It's not modeled for them. So yeah, my feeling is that the second quote is really that one to me is the strongest, because they really do have to work so very much harder to try to catch up.
And when you talk about kindergartners having to work so much harder, and we think about students coming in high school or even late middle school trying to reach the graduation, that they have to work even harder than these kindergarten kids who in many cases are learning a lot of the materials along with their native English speaker counterparts. So thank you.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You think about how much the kindergartners lack. You can only imagine then how much they lack in middle school and high school, especially. That's exactly right. Yeah. So that one to me stuck out more so than again, I don't want, sometimes I've been accused of being a little sassy.
I'm sure you use it well.
Right, thank you.
All right, thanks, Peggy. I'm going to mute you. That's
Okay.
great. Let's see if we have any other hands up at this time. We do have several hands up. Helen, I'm unmuting you. Hi, Helen.
Hey, hello everybody.
How are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yay. Okay. Well, I want to piggyback on what we were saying earlier, because it's very important when we talk to parents that we make them aware that their students are going to need a little longer to catch up. I had an experience with some parents who were refusing to receive any EL services. they were pull-out services, and they didn't want the children to be pulled out because they thought that they were very fluent in English. And the children, this particular girl was actually very fluent, but in social language, not academic language. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding with parents and even classroom teachers that if a child can communicate pretty well, then they are academically at the same level as English speakers. And it's our responsibility to help them understand that being proficient means being proficient in academic language that can help them be successful when they take those end of year tests. So having that information and knowing about, BICS and CALP, basic interpersonal skills and academic language development, it's very important.
Yes, so that distinction is very important. And to many of us that have done this for years, we just take it for granted, not even realizing that our counterparts in the classrooms or even administrators might not be aware of that difference. Thank you so much, Helen. I'm going to unmute Giovanna. You're self-muted, Giovanna. Are you able to unmute?
Accident.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was just typing there that even though I'm, an adult still, and English is my second language, I'm still trying to catch up with people like you, for example, that work there at DPI, native English speakers. So that gap still continues, even after you graduate from college.
And I would say as a native English speaker, that gap continues. When I'm around someone like my husband, who's a voracious reader, I might not know all the references he makes or understand some of the vocabulary he uses. So we're all learning the language. But yes, those gaps are going to vary and be different. Thank you, Giovanna. Let's see who else has their hand up. Yes, Anne-Marie.
So it looks like some of you put things in the question box, but I think it'd be good to go ahead and unmute you to share that with us. I'm going to start at the top. Allison, please go ahead. I'm going to unmute you and share with us your thoughts on these two quotes and which one you would use.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I think they're both very true and very powerful, but if I was trying to make a point, I would use the first one because for an EL to learn, he cannot just sit there receiving or listening. They have to have conversations. They have to interact with peers, not just with the one student that speaks their own language that's sitting in the class. And they should be taking things to do at home that are challenging, not something that's simple just for repetition. So I think I would use the first one to make a point.
Thank you. Who are you unmuting next, Anne-Marie? We're going to Anna. All right, Anna, you're unmuted. Are you willing to share?
Yes, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're getting a little bit of background noise.
Okay. Is that good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I agree with both quotes. I'm an English myself, and I believe too, like the gap still continues. But then also, they don't only have to learn the language, but also learn the new culture and how to get along here and everything.
Sí, mi amor.
I don't know what this sound is.
I don't know. I think someone else is unmuted. I'm looking. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. No, that not only have to learn the language, but also learn how to, they have to acculturate themselves to this new place. So there's so many things in their minds that it makes it much more difficult too.
Okay, yeah, the acculturation, the new location, all of those are parts of that. All right, I have muted you.
All right, I'm going to unmute Miguel to share what he's been putting into the question box. It looks very interesting. Miguel, you're unmuted.
Miguel, if you're talking, we can't hear you. perhaps his microphone isn't working. Do you want to read some of what he wrote?
Yes. So Miguel's noted he thinks the quote, English learners must make more than 1 year's progress in a row to eventually catch up, is the one that he finds more relevant to what he does in the classroom working with ELLs. He says the ELLs, from his perspective, need much more help than the ESL program that, for example, takes place on both the schools where he's working at. He came to realize that quite often the ESL program is not effective enough. As a result, these students usually perform below the grade level due to their language barrier. What he's observed is that the ESL program is very focused on social language rather than the acquisition of academic language. Moreover, there's a gap when it comes to link or scaffold the content of the mainstream classroom with that content that is taught in the ESL classroom.
Nice. And I was going to see if Chris Poston would be willing to talk. He mentioned legislators, and I'm interested to know what you're thinking about in relation to legislators. Chris, are you willing to talk?
Absolutely. I just kind of typed what a lot of the our team has already echoed. I think I would use the second quote, that our English language learners must make more than 1 year progress. I think sometimes, and like some other folks have said, that we forget that they are learning academic language in addition to the social language. And also, if there's any gaps in instruction or curriculum, they're also trying to catch up those gaps as well. And so, so I would use the second quote.
And what would you hope the legislators to get from that quote?
I think just realizing that there's just a lot of heavy lifting and not take for granted. I think sometimes we can have that mindset, that, hey, are we holding a group back, or are we providing everything for all the kids, but not realizing just all the heavy lifting that our ELs are doing every day as they are, learning and acclimating and working really hard, and all the things that our teachers are also doing as they're working to reach and teach all the modalities in their classroom.
All right, thank you so much. I wonder if we should go on to the next slide. I think we're going to have some overlap. Did you have anything that you wanted to read before we moved on, Emery?
Well, there are several people who have interesting comments here. I think I'd just like to unmute a few of them to share what you've already typed in the questions box. Kimberly, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can share. Kimberly, if you click your microphone, you should be able to unmute. Well, what Kimberly had was English learners must make more than 1 year's progress for many years in a row to eventually catch up. And then there's some folks, then she goes on to say, the first quote has a negative connotation and gives the impression that ELs are victims in some way. The second quote shows more of an initiative and shows the amount of work it takes to actually close the gap. Emily also has some things to say about the second quote. So Emily Long, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can share that with us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go on ahead.
I agree with both of them, but the second one just shows how much of an impact that these kids and how hard they have to work. That it is, I mean, they have so much that they have to learn, and we are just taking for granted that, hey, we're giving you this information, you're going to be an English speaker, you're supposed to be an English speaker, so you're going to pick it up just like that. And we're not thinking about all of the other things that they're having to learn as well. The academic language, just the regular language. It's just so much that they're having to learn. I mean, it's just overwhelming.
Yes, that's a good point. Rachel also has a comment about the second quote, so I'm unmuting her to share.
Hi, I do agree that the second quote actually does kind of value English language learners a little more. But then I thought it was also important, and we may get to this coming up soon, but in the chapter it talks about how bilingual education is best to eliminate that achievement gap. And it helps keep English language learners close to their native English speakers as well.
Great, thank you for sharing. I also see that Carlos prefers a second quote. Carlos, go ahead. I've unmuted you to share.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, go ahead.
All right. Yes. I chose the second one also because according to what we read, um, their counterpart native speakers may take 10 months or 12 months growth or may make this kind of growth, whereas the ESL group is going to take a little bit longer. The same as other people have shared, definitely is because they're struggling with, learning the language and the core material. What I would like the lawmakers to see is the need that they really need see the needs, provide the funding, and stop cutting off our budgets because they, the ESL people, as all the teachers, but we ESL teachers are trying to do our best, and sometimes they cut off our fundings and then we lose positions, we lose assistance, and that also impacts our programs negatively.
We talk about.
All right. So we talk about is that funding and how important the funding is, but also ways that we can be creative and work within that funding stream. We talk about ESL teachers a lot, but we also, want to talk about what those content teachers are doing because that's often where our students are the majority of the day, and it takes all of those pieces of the puzzle to meet the needs of our students. So I think we have one more slide that is connected to these same topics on double the work. So some of you have been talking about the things that were in this connection, double the work. The double the work does talk mostly about our middle and high school students, but when we talk about all the things you've been saying, that it takes more than 10, an EL student needs to make more than 10 months of progress in a school year. So they need to actually accomplish more growth in a school year than a native English speaker. And we know how difficult that can be. And so when you look at double the work, I don't know if you had a chance to download it and read through it or not, but when you look at the table of contents, they make it very clear the 6 challenges that were found in the research that was done. And I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, look at the names of the people that worked on this publication. Although it came out in 2007, it is still very pertinent today when you look at the challenges of lack of common criteria for identifying our L's and tracking their academic performance. The second challenge they identified was lack of appropriate assessments. The third, inadequate educator capacity for improving literacy in L's. The fourth, lack of appropriate and flexible program options, and that's what a lot of you have been talking about today. Challenge 5, limited use of research-based instructional practices, and Challenge 6, lack of a strong and coherent research agenda for adolescents ELL literacy. So we're curious to hear from you, really a continuation of what you've already said as you looked at those 2 quotes, but what did you find interesting if you did have the chance to read Double the Work, and what solutions possibly have you found to help close the achievement gap?
And it looks like Sandra Brighton has a solution she wants to share. Sandra, I'm unmuting you. Go ahead.
Sandra, can you hear us? If you are talking, we cannot hear you.
All right, she's just indicated her mic isn't working right now. That's okay. We'll read her response out. Her solution is that you train all content teachers in L strategies. So it's applied across all contents in all classrooms all day and not just in a short pull-out session.
Fantastic solution. And we know we have people across the state of North Carolina in different districts and in different schools that have used various things such as the SIOP model in order to try to do that, to really make sure that all teachers have those strategies. And when you look at Double the Work and you look at who some of the authors are, you will see Dr. Deborah Short, one of the authors of the SIOP model, is also one of the authors of this publication. Do we have another hand up?
We have
Swetha.
several.
I'm going to unmute Swetha. Swetha, you're self-muted. Swetha, are you there? You're self-muted. You need to unmute so we can hear you. It says she cannot take control. Let's try again. There you go. Can you hear us?
Hi, Ivana. Hi, thank you. Yeah, hello. So yes, I can hear you. I just want to say that it's as much as in need of the educators at the school level who are teaching that core content to obviously realize the deal and the whole purpose of meeting those classroom instructional needs of those ELs. I mean, of course, they should be equipped with all those amazing strategies like PSYOP and whatnot. I also believe that sometimes the administrators can be oblivious at the school level. I mean, they're expecting all that thing to happen, but they got to educate themselves as far as the research-based needs and what does research say and what goes behind in deciding these strategies. And why should they be implemented at the school level, So sometimes it's also about the awareness and information that sometimes I find some of the administrators don't have in place, They're assuming a lot of things and they don't realize that your students need a lot more than the regular native speakers. So how much more scaffolding and support and explicit, intentional language and content-based instructional needs have to be met for these students so that they can grow in the adequate time that they're supposed to produce that language. So I believe it's educators as well as the administrators and everybody who is involved with their education at the school level. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I see some more comments coming up in the question box. Elizabeth, we're going to unmute you so that you can share. Go ahead, please. And if she's getting set, I'll also unmute Louisa, who's commented, to share. So Louisa or Elizabeth?
Elizabeth, can you hear us? Do you want to read what they wrote?
Well, Elizabeth said that ELs have skills that peers haven't been taught yet. Note-taking, highlighting, analyzing, and breaking down a text. So that's something to consider as well. Louisa said she found it interesting that even when research shows it takes 5 to 7 years to close that gap, legislators still require for ELs to exit the program in a lesser amount of time. And she goes on to say one good solution would be co-teaching in a bilingual setting where students feel supported in both languages.
I see that Emily Golightly has her hand up. Emily?
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So one of the things that jumped out to me was that focus on vocabulary development. And one of the schools that I serve is a higher poverty school than some of the others that I serve. And I see that need not just with the English learners, but with all students. So, really training our teachers and specialists about the intentionality of that vocabulary instruction, using cognates, using the Freyer model, using, a connection with the visual, all those wonderful things that they're getting in their ESL classes, but bringing that into the regular classroom on a regular basis across content areas. So they're getting that word attack knowledge and are more able to use it themselves independently through that practice and support.
And so looking at best practices, some of which are often used in ESL classrooms, but actually benefit all of our students. So thank you for sharing that.
Gabriella has a comment that kind of goes along with that. Gabriella, you're unmuted, so you can share.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think it is very true that all of us need to work, the school, the teachers, the parents. We need to give tools to the parents because sometimes they think, well, you know, like in kindergarten, are you reading to your child? Does your child know the colors, the letters? Well, no, and I don't want to teach him because I don't want to confuse him. And trying to educate the parent as to, you know, what is best for the student, what to do at home. Even though you don't speak English, yes, you can still help your child at home. And also to make sure that the strategies and in the modifications in the classroom are happening in the regular classroom, and that the teachers have those tools that are going to help the student, because a lot of schools just think it's the ESL teacher's job, and they don't realize that it's everybody's job. It's you know, it's not just my student, but it's our student, and to be able to work together to help them. So it's not only about resources, but it's much more than that, but it's working together as a team. I had an example recently. The teacher just said, well, can you help this third grader? She doesn't know the sequence words, and she's not doing the assignment, and she's not understanding the assignment. So I said, well, what's the assignment? She was supposed to write the steps on how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And the problem was not the vocabulary, it's just that she's never had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She didn't know what that was.
Right.
So, and, you know, assuming that all the students know everything about culture, about different things, it's just, you know, and it was a simple thing. It's just, okay, so let's make one in the classroom. And she was completely able to describe and do the steps and the sequence of how to prepare a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. She just never had one before. She didn't even know where to start because she had never seen one or eaten one or didn't know what the teacher was talking about.
So building that background through modeling, even with something as simple as a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing.
In those assumptions that, you know, like somebody said before, oh, the social language is there. So, okay, so then they know everything, and they're assuming that, you know, the context and the topics and the culture, everything it's there, and it's really not.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right, let's go ahead and read something from the question box. I think folks are putting their comments in there when their mics don't work. Emily Lewis commented that her district found that standalone ESL classes, specifically at the middle and high school levels, were not having the desired results. Therefore, they have come up with two solutions. The first one was that they changed their program design to include mostly collaborative partnerships with an ESL specialist and a regular ed teacher sharing the instructional responsibilities in a co-taught classroom. The second solution was they had worked closely with their high school ESL specialist to map out curriculum and create thematic units to teach in the year-long ESL course offered for newcomers. Newcomers take this course in addition to any co-taught course for the first year or two in U.S. schools.
Very interesting. And if you look at page 28 in Double the Work, you have some information about language development programs, and it talks about a little bit of what you're talking about there, looking at content-based ESL classrooms, looking at sheltered instruction, looking at dual language immersion. And so the information in Double the Work, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, we do encourage you to look at it. One of the things we will be talking about coming up soon in another module is the Language Instruction Educational Plan, or the Ell Iep, which is the programming for ELLs. And that's exactly the kind of thing that you're just talking about with Emily. How are you meeting the needs of those students, your ELs, and all your students? You know, I think we're having such an amazing conversation today. We are not going to cover all of our questions.
Well, let's try to finish this one up and move on. We are getting a lot of comments back from people in the questions box that they really like the solutions you're offering to each other. And we did have a critically important question. Someone wanted to know, where do we find the article Double the Work?
So in the module, do you want to pull it up in Canvas? In the module on Canvas, in the section called Connections, you actually have two connections in this particular Canvas module. You have one for Lingual Folio, which we'll be talking about in just a minute, and also one for Double the Work. And the hyperlinks for this free downloadable publication is there. And Anne-Marie is taking just a minute to log into the Canvas instance so that we can show you exactly where that is.
Yeah, give me just a second because I've stopped showing my screen so you don't have to see all the moving around behind the scenes.
Or your big secret password. But Double the Work, as I said, has been out since 2007, but the materials that are there are very pertinent to today. The subtitle is Challenges and Solutions to Acquiring Language and Academic Literacy for Adolescents English Language Learners. And as I mentioned, Dr. Deborah Short, one of the SIOP authors, is one of the co-authors of this particular publication. So as I was mentioning on page 28, it talks about language development programs. It even gives you some examples of what some districts are doing specifically to meet the needs of their adolescent Ells. So Anne-Marie is going to pull up the screen. There you go. So when you are in chapter 3, which is module 5, she's going to modules. In each of our modules, the point 2 is the connections. So 5.2 gives you the connection with Lingual Folio and then with Double the Work. So you can see the hyperlink there for the free download. And that's one of the reasons that we like to talk about these connections, because you have what's in the chapters, but we want to make sure that you're seeing how it connects to other things in the nation and also in the state. Thanks for that question, and thank you, Anne-Marie, for going to that in Canvas. So is that a good place to transition to Lingual Folio? I'm getting an awful reverberation of my own voice.
Yes, so let's go back to our slides about Lingual Folio. That was the other connection you saw in the module when we looked at where Double the Work was. So as you read, Lingual Folio is a formative assessment tool, a portfolio tool, that helps English learners move towards gap closure. And honestly, it works for all language learners, whether they're learning English or any other language. This is a tool that helps students identify what they can do already with a series of can-do statements. It helps them set goals for what they want to do within a language, and it gives them a place to collect artifacts to substantiate their progress or to show their evidence of the progress that they're making. So think about that for a minute, because this is really a self-empowerment tool for our language learners, especially our English learners, because remember, they can document their progress in English as well as their first language or home language or heritage language, however they think about that first language. And it's a place for them to also keep track of their progress as they move forward. We've heard a lot of students, especially with the goal setting aspect of Lingual Folio, once they learn how to set their own goals, apply that to other content areas. So when we're talking about Ells who need to know, for example, the language of math and the language of science and social studies, this is a place for them to get a real understanding of what it takes to build their proficiency in a language, and then to transfer that goal setting they do with their actual language skills into academic content areas. So let's pause for a minute and think about either the question, how can you use Lingual Folio, or how do you use Lingual Folio already? Because we know there are people here who probably are just learning about Lingual Folio through this module, but maybe there are people here too who've been using Lingual Folio with their students. We've done quite a bit of work with Lingual Folio over the past about 15 years that we've had this tool. And we know that our English learners do use this quite extensively, K-12. And so we wanted to know if someone who wants to share about that. Anna, I see you have a comment. Anna said she really likes Lingual Folio as a self-assessment tool to see what students already know and what they still have to learn. And that's a good point, Anna, because not only is this a self-empowering tool for students, but it's a form of assessment tool for teachers so that we can adjust our instruction once we can see, like you said, what students know and are able to do already, and then what they need to grow into. So that's really helpful to us instructionally. We do have a question from Cyrilda about Linguafolio. She said, is it for all grades? Yes, it can be used K-12. And could it be adapted for preschoolers? It actually has been. There's a Linguafolio Junior. There's also a new Linguafolio tool called Linguafolio Online, or LFO, and that's available for all. It's available as an app, and I think we all know how quickly our students adapt to apps and how much they like to use them, particularly if you're in a school that uses, a one-to-one situation or uses a lot of technology, period. And so definitely it can be used with all ages and including adults. We often encourage our teachers to have their own Linguafolio so that they're looking at their own lifelong journey in language learning, because we know it is a lifelong endeavor. And it's good for you as a teacher to keep track of that, but also to think about then how your students approach it as learners.
I'm seeing responses like awesome and thank you. So if you haven't had a chance to explore Linguafolio already, we hope that those hyperlinks in the connection will help you to explore that and to learn more, and to feel free to ask us questions.
And I'd see some questions about what does Linguafolio cost and is it expensive? The good news is it's totally free. A national group actually first created Linguafolio, and then here in North Carolina, we've done some additional work with it to make sure it's adapted and ready for English learners. It was originally created for world languages, but it's used now in all language learning environments, world languages, dual language immersion, and English learning environments. And it's free. If you go to our website or use those links, obviously they're in our modules, you'll see that you can download Word and PDF documents for Linguafolio and use them in your classroom. Those are totally free. And also the state of North Carolina has actually contracted to make LFO accounts, so the online version of Linguafolio, free to teachers and students here in North Carolina's K-12 public schools. And so that's something I encourage you to explore on the website. And in fact, we're getting ready to launch the LFO access form that you can fill out if you want to use the online version of Linguafolio.
And Carlos had a great question. Is it used throughout the ESL student's lifetime in public schools? So it's very exciting to see what some people have done with the Linguafolio. As Anne-Marie talked about, there are different versions, paper version, online version. We have students that have taken their Linguafolio in various versions and taken it even after they've graduated from high school, taking it into interviews as an opportunity to show the interviewer what they can do in a language. So yes, a student can take that with them from class to class. We've even had students that talked about how their ESL teacher was using the Linguafolio, but they then went to their content teachers and said, hey, why aren't we using these strategies here? Why aren't we looking at what we can do and setting our goals in our content classes? So yes, there's really no limit to what you can do with the Linguafolio.
One thing I'm going to do is go ahead and put, for those of you who are interested, the bit.ly link that we have for the whole Linguafolio site. I know you can get it in the module as well, but if you're wanting to look at it right now, we certainly can. So I put that in the chat box. I'm sending out to everyone. It's bit.ly/NC-Linguafolio. It is case sensitive though, so keep that in mind. If you just click on that link in the chat box now, you can go directly to the spaces that we already have on the Google Sites for you to look at. So you can start exploring that even beyond the module information. I see several people are commenting about this. Gabriella said she uses Linguafolio and some of the can-do statements and things and feels they're a necessary tool. She did the training in 2013, and she's also familiar with them when she taught in Germany. And please know that the European Language Portfolio, the ELP, as it's called there, was sort of the foundation, if you will, for Linguafolio here in the United States. We're proud to share that in North Carolina, we were one of the first 5 states that were part of that 5-state pilot in 2005, some years ago now. But we did bring it over from Europe, as Gabriella is indicating. And so they do still have the European Language Portfolio there, and they use the Common European Framework of Reference as their proficiency scale, the SUFFER scale, whereas we use the actual proficiency scale here for world language learning, and of course the TESOL scale, or what's used with WIDA for English learners. And so all of that information with all of those scales for proficiency are available in our Linguafolio materials for everyone.
And as Anne Marie mentioned, North Carolina was part of that first 5 pilot state, and then North Carolina developed the ESL version of the Lingua Folio. And several of you have mentioned the connections you see with WIDA and that can-do approach and having those can-do statements and having the students look at ways that they can be in charge of setting their own goals. So great connections you guys are making here.
And I see a couple comments about folks who said they've heard about LinguaFolio before, maybe in another webinar broadcast or maybe at a conference, or they've had someone in their school who used it, but they haven't investigated themselves yet, but they're going to. Please do that. There's a lot of information on our website about NC LinguaFolio, including the free materials, but it's important that you read kind of through those and know how best to use it in your classroom. One of the things we're getting ready to do based on feedback from teachers who are already using LinguaFolio is to offer what we call a LinguaFolio Cafe. And that'll be an informal time online like this, but not as structured, where teachers can share how they're using LinguaFolio in their classroom. So those of you who are asking about, what does it look like in kindergarten or in the lower grades? What does it look like in middle school? How does it look in a dual language immersion environment versus English learners versus traditional world languages? You can come and ask all those questions at the LinguaFolio Cafe. I would encourage you to sign up for the NC LinguaFolio listserv because information about that, of course, will be coming out there in addition to other listservs that we share from DPI. But you may want to stay up on that.
So we have someone who lost audio and has come back in and is interested about what we're talking about. That's great.
Well, like we said, there's a lot to investigate with LinguaFolio, but we are noticing the time. So let's go ahead and move on from our LinguaFolio conversation.
And one thing I just wanted to say before we move away from connections is that we did have one person who pointed out that when they tried to look at the videos at the beginning of the connections, that it said coming soon. So those videos are something that we had hoped to have ready for this broadcast. The goal is really to have them for the self-paced options of this particular book study, but we were hoping to have all of them ready for this one and just haven't been able to get that done. So you will see at the beginning of each of the connections a link to the script for that video so that you can get sort of an introduction into what you're going to see in the connection, and you can understand what we're thinking when we made those connections and when we placed them in the book study. Once those videos are available, we will be adding them, but thank you for pointing it out. Yes, the videos are coming soon, but the link to the transcripts are there.
All right. Well, we're conscious of our time. Got you for a few more minutes here. So let's switch back and talk about the actual reading now that we've talked about the connections. According to the authors in chapter 3, administrators and policymakers are often unconvinced about the time needed for an English learner to become proficient in English. When they've tried to determine ways to speed up the process, they found that Ells schooled and tested in English need 5 to 7 years or more to reach the level of English proficiency that is expected. So let's think about that. Is your school system allowing its English learners to achieve parity and long-term achievement with native English speakers and disaggregating that data by groups? And we want to note that on page 28 and also in Appendix B on pages 111 through 117, there's some information you may want to take a close look at. So when you consider that question, how can you utilize the guidance on data disaggregation in your work? And you can consider things like MTSS, staffing, programming, that kind of thing. How would you use that guidance from the book in your work?
So Carmen has posted something in the chat box, and I would really like to hear a little more about that. Let me see, Carmen, can you hear us? You're self-muted. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about your comment about unattainable expectations?
Hey, can you
There
hear
you go.
me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think when our administrators do not understand.
Oh, I lost her. Hold on. It looks like you got muted again somehow. Okay, now it says you're self-muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Try again.
It's just unreasonable in terms of what the administrator expects of the growth. And many times it can influence our kids to have a negative connotation within the when they start talking about the growth of the school and and where we are as compared with other schools. And you see that the kids aren't growing. It's not that they're not growing, it's that the expectations on our kids are out of skew.
So you're thinking it's very important that we look at what the expectations are and making sure that we're not expecting more from our English learners than we're actually expecting from our native English speakers. Thank you. So let's see, we have some other comments. Rachel has typed a number of things. Let's unmute Rachel and see if she can share that with all of us. Rachel?
Hi. I had thought that the data component was important to show by administration, even at the county level, to see how our kids are doing. The test that they talked about on Appendix B, it would be really interesting to see how well we are serving our ELs over a period of time, like the 6-year. See how they're doing and if they're reaching the grade level with our programs that are in place. I have not done anything like that before, so it would be interesting to see kind of where our kids are and to make the administration aware of that as well, so that the supports that need to be in place can kind of be made known to the county and hopefully get the support that we need to help our ELs. And then I also thought that I've known for years that it takes 5 to 7 years or more to achieve proficiency academically in a second language, because I don't know, I guess it's crazy to me that many of our teachers that we work with in administration and the policymakers just have no clue that it takes that much time and effort. It's not easy, as we all know. But I think that it's important to make people aware of that so we can serve our kids best, and just that awareness can lead to changes, hopefully, for the positive.
Right, so that longitudinal data is something some people haven't thought about. And as we get into the next chapter, you'll see some of the findings that Thomas and Collier had in their longitudinal studies. And Marie, do you see one you'd like to unmute? We've got several here.
Yes, got quite a few. Sandra Brighton, let's try to unmute you. I had several comments here that I think would be best if you just shared them outright. So you're unmuted, please go ahead. Oh, she doesn't have a microphone, so we'll go ahead and share hers. She said she would like to have separated the L's she has, dividing them into 3 groups. So talking about data disaggregation and creating those subgroups to compare, and then look at the achievement gaps. That would help them see how their core instruction is, if the SIAP strategies are working at the core level with the content level teachers. And if there is an achievement gap, then it would help in our sell to the board for additional staffing to help with L staffing and to bring on, let's say, additional teachers. Also, Emily Golightly, I see that you've got a comment. You're self-muted, so you can go ahead and unmute and share.
Okay, so I just basically said that I think our district is aware of the achievement gaps between some subgroups, including our L's, economically disadvantaged and African American population. So we're aware that they're not achieving at the same level, but there's not a financial resource to deal with that from what I've seen recently. There's 0 dual language programs in our district, and even though the research supports this, we just haven't had that up to this point. So I'm hopeful that by sharing this data with the people at central office, maybe we could justify adding supports like that we don't currently have.
And you're right, the DLI programs are growing across the state, but they've not yet reached every single district. We are on track, hopefully, to meet that goal sometime in the future.
With your help, of course. So I see Cyrilda has put some comments in, especially about our migrant students. Cyrilda, you're unmuted.
Hi. One of the issues with the migrant students, with it taking 5 to 7 years to acquire language, they move a lot. So the way the program even works, the students might be with us for a year and then they move to another district or another school within our district. And depending on the number of ELs in the school, if there's a large population, the chances are they'll be served on a daily basis. If it's a smaller population, they may be served twice a week, if that often. So I think programs similar to Lingua Folio, if they're able to move with the students and more of us are educated on how to use them, it'll give more continuity of the program in general, so that they'll benefit more from it.
And thank you for making that connection.
Giovanna, I see that you've had several comments. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You can share those out for yourself.
Yes. Like I said in my box, my federal program director, she likes data. She does a lot of meeting in all the schools from elementary, middle, and high school. They look at data, and well, I really don't know why they talk about it, but I know since she is the federal program director in charge of the EL program, she takes into account that group, and not only that one, but the migrant, the homeless, and all that information to make decisions to better the program here in Sampson County.
All right, thank you.
We have a note from Kimberly talking about the difference this makes or not in her work. She's known about these facts for years, she says, and what she finds surprising is how many schools and districts continue to attempt to enforce an early exit model. It's clear that there continues to be much work to do with administrators and legislators in teaching them that although they might want an early exit model, the brain just does not work that way, and there's much more research to support this. And I want to add on Gabriella's comments to that, because she also commented on the time and resources needed to really build language proficiency. And she had a suggestion, let's call it a solution, that she's putting out there, where she said she would love for these decision makers to attempt to learn a second language themselves. Maybe that would open their minds and eyes a little more and make them feel more empathy towards our English learners.
And we have a comment from Jesus Centeno. I'm going to unmute you, Jesus, if you don't mind sharing with us. Can you hear me, Jesus?
Yes, ma'am.
It's great. Do you mind sharing what?
Yes, ma'am. Well, I just type out that the main situation is to have access to the whole picture, to come out with local information that can be considered as relevant. It seems that it is required to have access to local data that has been collected over time to make believers in the local level as well as in the community, because sometimes you struggle with people listening to you just by yes, you have been working this many years and you got some experience, but in your experience, is it is that enough? I know there are some research, but people are not really into paying attention to research. And in the book study, it says something that caught my attention. It says it's money is about how much you are expending and for how long. So in the community, it would be very, very good to have more voices that can spread the word.
And I think that's very interesting that you bring that up about the voices, because, Thomas and Collier, when we get to the Red Book, did a lot of their research in North Carolina. But we found that even in schools or districts where that research was conducted, until an individual school has their own data, sometimes the administrators don't listen. It's all about really knowing your own data and bringing that together. But it's interesting, too, that some people said sometimes that data can be really confusing, that the charts and the graphs in the book were sometimes confusing when you're looking at the native speakers and comparing them to the English learners and looking at that normal curve and looking at the equivalents. And so if you're struggling with some of these charts, I think you'll be real excited in the next chapter with the chart that Thomas and Collier bring together with a lot of their research. But the main thing to understand from these charts is talking about drilling down into those subpops, that often the gaps are hidden when you just look at the bell curve of distributions of student scores. But when you look at the subpopulations, you'll see that that bell curve sits at a very different place for our English learners, on a much lower score than where you are with the native English speakers. And that's the achievement gap that where we're trying to make those curves actually match up.
And we're seeing several comments in the question box about how sometimes those charts and graphs are pretty confusing. Certainly the research that Thomas and Collier have done has been extensive and is multi-layered. And so take the time you need to look carefully at those graphs, to pick out one thing at a time, to follow on the graphs and really understand. Because with any kind of research like that, it's important to focus in on one component, particularly the component that's most important for the learners you have, and then really understand how that works for them. That'll make you a better spokesperson, if you will, for talking about the data and the research. So with that, let's go on ahead. And we come to what questions or thoughts about Chapter 3 or Module 5, which Chapter 3 is in, would you like to share with the group that we haven't yet talked about?
And there was one comment about how sometimes if you are in a position where you're not in the classroom, that it's hard to comment on some of these things. And so we just encourage you to think about within your own situation, what pieces of this puzzle are important to you? What pieces of the research, or just even listening anecdotally to the feedback that you're getting from the other participants on this book study.
So we're seeing some comments about those charts and graphs and understanding them. Christina said she really likes some PD on interpreting data to find those, for those who aren't familiar or have been out of grad school for a while. And she put a little smiley face. Certainly grad school, you look at research carefully like this, but if it's been a while since you've had the opportunity to do that, it does take time to explore.
And one of the offerings that we do have through the EL support team that has one more session coming up soon, I believe in November, is looking at ESSA and looking at our data and how that ties into accountability in North Carolina. And that is offered by Lanny Simpson, who is one of our EL coordinators in Burke County. So if you're on our listserv, you'll see the announcement. I think the announcement for that is scheduled to come out next week. We have very limited spaces. It's highly in demand, and we will be offering it hopefully several more times this year. But it's a great way to look at your access data, your EOG data, as well as other data to help you understand how to meet those needs of your ELs, to identify those gaps, and then how to attack them. Yes, a really good question about how does ESSA expectations for the number of years an EL has to exit the EL program, how does that impact the idea that we need to speed up the process? So ESSA required that all states have a time to exit that is determined by the state. And so if you're familiar with the what we have in our ESSA plan, depending on where a student tests on their first access test, what their proficiency level is on that test, there's then a chart that says, based on this initial proficiency level, this is how many years you have until the student is expected to exit. And so the North Carolina table does come in a little under those 7 years, but the states had the autonomy to make those decisions. A lot of data that I can't begin to explain to you was looked at to make those determinations. A number of stakeholder groups, including the English Learner Advisory Council, was involved in that. And again, the federal government then has to approve. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, I will try to pull that up for our next webinar. I'm going to make myself a note on the ESSA data. So that we can look at that actual chart, a time to exit. So the way it works in accountability is the student tests in, they have a certain number of years to exit. Please note that that is based off of their first access test. So if a student begins at the beginning of a school year, they have an entire year under their belt before they take that access test. So they really have a year that they're in schools in the US before that clock starts ticking based on that access test. And if I'm making some of your heads spin, it's okay. It makes mine spin as well. And I will see what I can put together to share with you guys and maybe even add to a module. Let's see. Lots of people seconding and thirding on that interpreting the data.
Emily has made a note. She said she has a question or thought, specifically on page 23 in the second paragraph. So page 23 in the second paragraph. It states that students more easily reached math and ELA achievement when compared to their progress in science and social studies. So her question is this due to there being such a strong emphasis on reading and math achievement due to testing pressure? Or do we think this has more to do with all of the content-specific vocabulary that they are grappling with as English learners?
I certainly don't have an answer to that. I'm writing.
I actually have a partial answer to her question about math proficiency happening faster than science and social studies. But the answer I have really comes from dual language immersion. The language of math, and if you think about that for a minute, think about what students are learning in math classes in different grade spans, elementary, middle school, and high school. The language of math is often considered to be more simple and straightforward than the language of other content areas. And oftentimes, for example, in dual language immersion, that can be a content class taught in the DLI program language, but only up to a certain point. And there are actually researchers and practitioners with DLI programs who say that you should stop teaching math in the DLI program language at a certain point because there's nothing more to be gained linguistically from a proficiency standpoint. So that may be why our English learners seem to achieve higher in math before they can in science and social studies is because of the language of math itself.
So I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. I'm going to put in the chat box the link to the ESSA plan, and pages 30 to 31 are where you would want to look to get that information about the time to exit. So if you want to look at that and then have additional questions in our next broadcast, or even in some of your reflection questions within the module. Wow, we are almost out of time. We better move on. So our wrap-up poll for tonight, because we want to make sure we get you out of here on time. So what next steps are you going to take? Are you going to dig deeper into the chapter in the module, or maybe the previous chapters or the upcoming ones? Are you going to analyze ESL research more closely? Are you going to analyze EL data to determine next steps, or maybe take a class on how to do that? Will you initiate discussions among your colleagues? Many of you are talking about we don't have this in our district yet as far as dual language, or we have other things we need to do to meet the needs of our students. And will you advocate for change? So you can choose as many of these as apply to you. What will your next steps be? All right, a little over 70% of you have voted. Do remember that the poll questions are part of how you get that extra point to get to the full 10. And we do appreciate all of the participation today. Let's give it about 2 more seconds, and then we can close out this poll. All right, let's see what people have to say. So each of these has some people that have responded. 83% of you dig deeper into the chapters and the modules, and that makes us feel really good about the work that we're doing here and the way that you guys are helping to inspire each other. More than half of you for each of the other answers, analyzing research, analyzing data, discussing with your colleagues, and advocating for change. And so as we're going through this book study and the future book studies, those are all the kinds of things that we hope you'll leave each session with an idea of something that you can actually put into practice or begin to ask questions about or share with other people as you walk away from what you've done during our time together. All right, we don't have time to discuss. So, Anne-Marie?
So let's finish up with a few reminders about our course and how it works. I just wanted to mention about the grading of the synchronous sessions. Obviously, if you participated today and you were online with us live, you get 8 out of your 10 points. If you did most of the poll questions, you get your 9 points. And if you participated in the discussion, you get the full 10. If you weren't able to participate live, and so you're listening to this recording, you can go to our Canvas course, whichever section you're in, the 1 CEU section, the 2 CEU section, and do the makeup assignment for synchronous session number 3. It's already posted there, and some of you might enjoy going and taking a look at what the makeup assignments are, because we ask people to listen to the recording and then comment on the things that they learn from that conversation. So as a follow-up for yourself, that might be something interesting. Also, don't forget, if you're doing this course for 2 CEUs, there's a little bit of extra work, obviously, to get that extra CEU. So you'll need to do a reflection question for the chapter and the quiz, the chapter reading quiz. Those of you who like to dig deeper into the reading and are planning to do that, the quiz is really a good way to do that. And the quiz is something, too, that will be part of the self-paced course when this is released statewide with that intent in mind. Also, don't forget, we have sort of 2 sections, or almost 2 courses, but certainly 2 sections in Canvas, and that's what they look like. Also know that you access our Canvas course in the blue Canvas, the statewide Canvas. Some districts have a red Canvas access as well, but that's just for their district. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, this is part of a whole series, so we're just in the first book study for this series, and you can see the other books coming along soon. And our plan is to release those as book studies each academic year. So our goal is to have the Dual Language Education for a Transformed World book study available in the 2020-2021 year. I know that seems like a long ways away, but this academic year is certainly going quickly for a lot of us. So keep that in mind as you continue to work. And here we are at our wrap up and next steps. We're going on to Module 6, which has been visible for a while in the Canvas course, and that is Chapter 4. Everyone needs to do the readings, of course, whether you're in the 1 CEU section, the 2 CEU section, and then there's the quizzes and the discussion forum for the 2 CEU folks. Please try to have all that done before our next synchronous session on Tuesday, October 29th, and don't forget, that gives you 2 weeks because we don't have a session next week on October 22nd. So we will see everyone virtually on October 29th. From 4 o'clock to 5:30 p.m.
And that also gives us a chance to catch up on the grading. So we do enjoy seeing your introductions and reading your responses to the questions in the 2 CEUs and the discussion forums. So we do appreciate all of your hard work, and then also adding the grades for your participation on the broadcast. So hopefully we'll have those up to date by that next broadcast on the 29th as well.
And we are closing out exactly at 5:30. We thank you for joining us today. This has been quite a lively conversation. We enjoyed hearing you share your thoughts and also reading them when you gave us the chance in the question box. We do look forward to seeing you next time. And you can always contact us, although we encourage you to contact us within the Canvas course. We always put an announcement in the Canvas course on Fridays as a reminder to everyone about what's coming next, and you can reply to that, or you can actually send us a message within the Canvas course. That helps us know what question you have, and if you share it with the announcements or something, there might be someone else with a similar question who you could be helping.
We appreciate your participation. Thank you so much.